Great to see
Hopefully,
you too.
last time we were speaking, Pokrovsk was about to fall, and you were pretty
Yeah.
grim in that discussion. Obviously, your predictions came true, as Pokrovsk hasn't fallen yet, but it's getting closer and closer to falling. Some people saying it has fallen, which is pretty heartbreaking to see. But we, on a positive note, though, some would see it positive, others would see it negative. We do have at least some plan on the table, not a great one. And I'd say different plans on the table, because initially the initial reports, and I'll just read it out for the audience and you can maybe fill the gaps. The initial reports that came out of Axios was that Ukraine would withdraw from Donetsk and Lugansk, and Russia will freeze the lines in Kherson and Zaporizhia, and they will withdraw from Sumy and Kharkov. Militarily, Ukraine will cut its military by half, give up access to long-range weapons, and have no foreign troops, so no French, British peacekeeping force. Ukraine will also not join NATO, so it will remain neutral. Hard, to get security guarantees under these conditions, but it will be allowed to join the EU. Also, Ukraine will recognize Russian as an official language, grant formal status to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and hold elections in 100 days. So that was the initial report. And then we had another report by the British MEP, Ukrainian MEP, that had some terms that were a bit different, where Ukraine does not have to give up access to long-range weapons, from what I understand. There was talks of a security guarantee, I think a US 10-year security guarantee, but it was vague on what that security guarantee looks like. And Ukraine could keep 600,000 troops. So it's different to the initial plan of cutting troops by half. Also did not include recognizing Russian as an official language, or recognizing the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, giving it formal status. But it does include the election in 100 days. So I'd love you to fill the gaps and anything I got wrong, and would love to get your initial reaction, Denis.
Well, this proposal is basically okay, except two main points. It's understandable that NATO and everything of that, no one after all would like to see NATO, wouldn't like to see Ukraine in NATO. It was not the invitation for Ukraine to join NATO even before the war had started. So we're gonna put the NATO aside in this discussion. So it's not the main thing, but lowering the number of, let's say, not the troops, because 600,000 is still quite a big number. And in case of the continuous Russian invasion of Ukraine, Ukraine may mobilize reservists, which are out there. Like the current Ukrainian army is around 900,000 soldiers. So Ukraine, I think, cannot afford to sustain army of 600,000 during the peace period. It will be very, very expensive. So I think Ukraine itself will lower it even lower than 600,000. I think so. But then Russia attacked Ukraine in 2022. The number of the forces in Ukraine was 250,000. So they attacked, they said, about demilitarization. Then de facto Ukraine, even according to those agreements, will have 2 times at least bigger army than before the Russian intervention. Well, if the most important thing is for Ukraine to keep its weapons, foreign fighter jets, European fighter jets agreements which were signed with Gripen and with the French, with the Swedish side and with French side about Gripens, about Rafale jets. So everything of that should be fulfilled. So Ukraine should obtain weapons, because it's the only guarantee in this case. Even I would say even NATO is not a guarantee any longer, because I don't believe that someone would deploy its army really in combat with Russians on the Ukrainian territory, especially United States of America. So it's the only guarantee for Ukraine is the Ukrainian army. And of course, the main point which will not let Ukraine to sign everything of that is to give up territories without any fight. The most fortified area of Donbas and Luhansk, and it will not happen. So it's understandable, and because of that.
Okay, so this is the deal breaker. You think is giving up the fortified territory? That territory is essentially the 2 cities, and I'm gonna try to pronounce them: Petropavlivka and Alexandrivka. Did I pronounce them correctly? Which is after Pokrovsk?
No,
I got them wrong.
it's the line between Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Drushkivka, and Konstantinivka. That's the main line,
In the
the main
Donbas.
defense line in Donbas. Yeah.
Okay, which is after. So Pokrovsk has fallen now. This is the last fortified. So previously,
Yeah.
a previous NATO fortified line that
NATO?
Ukraine wants. Ukrainian fortified line. My apologies.
Yeah.
That Ukraine wants to hold as Russia continues to advance, and under that peace plan, Ukraine has to give up those fortifications. And what Ukraine is saying is that if Russia has those fortifications, it makes it much easier for them to continue invading Ukrainian territory. So that's a big deal breaker in your opinion.
Yeah, there are two main reasons why Ukraine will not give up. First, as I say to you, it's the main fortified line. The second, it's against the Ukrainian constitution. It's not about Zelensky, actually. It's about any sort of the Ukrainian government, president. So physically, they cannot give territories just like that because there are people living, how can you say? We're not speaking even about Donbas as territory because there are people. You may come to them and say, okay, now you're Russians, go to Russia. So it's no any government will approve that of Ukraine. And I think the main idea of this peace plan is to push Ukraine because we see just for Ukraine that Ukraine should give up that, Ukraine should give up this, but there is no pressure on Russia. Well, maybe the only pressure is with sanctions, yeah. But again, according to this agreement, that sanctions are lifted. So, and for Russia should still keep its army. Russia promises not to deploy its army to those Donbas regions, which could become a buffer area. So I think it's for now it looks unreal. It's basically about nothing.
With Russian advances, though, what options does Ukraine have, and what are your thoughts on the pressure that the US is putting onto Ukraine, saying that if you don't accept this peace deal, we will stop supplying weapons and sharing intelligence? How significant is that pressure in that ultimatum by Trump?
The main thing that they may block is for our European allies to purchase American weapons. That would be a very hard strike on the Ukrainian defense capabilities. But Ukraine has no other option than to defend somehow. And we see even now Ukraine is physically withdrawing the forces from the front lines. Russians are attacking more. They are taking the ground. It's reality, but even with that, Ukraine is capable in some way to sustain its sovereignty. And the main idea why Russia is so insisting on those peace agreements or something, because they are not capable to take those fortified regions of Donbas in a short-term perspective. They understand that it could take even a couple of years, maybe 3 years, and thousands of the life losses from Russian side. Also, unfortunately, Ukrainians also losing lives in this war. And that's why they want to take it just like that, and that's their goal, because they understand that their economy under sanctions and under this military machine, which is not producing anything with additional value. All of economy of Russia is based on military now, which has been just eliminated on the front line. So of course it harms Russia a lot. I mean, then this war continues. The idea for Ukraine is just to exchange territories for time, and that is how maybe Russian economy will collapse with the Russian regime. That's the only way, I think, unfortunately.
How important is that intelligence that the US is supplying Ukraine if they stop that intelligence sharing, that as they did it for a few days a while ago?
Well, it's important, especially if we speak about the long-range strikes on Russian oil refineries, Russian military infrastructure. I think the main downside of this American help, if they definitely want to cut it, is that Ukraine obtains Patriot Pike 3 missiles, and it's impossible to replace those, and only those missiles are capable to shut down Russian ballistics. So that's the worst thing for Ukraine, for the air defense.
There's also been a report, before we continue going back to the peace plan, because we're talking about intelligence sharing and that those long-range missiles by Ukraine into Russia. We also saw a few days the first ATACMS strike by Ukraine into Russian territory, which Russia's always said is a red line. And they said that this means the US, NATO, the US is directly involved in this war because these missiles cannot be fired without American support. I want to get your thoughts on the ATACMS missile strike into Russia, but also the report that, I think it was by Reuters, that these strikes by Ukraine onto Russian oil refineries has only impacted the refining production, Russian production by 3%, a 3% drop. I'm not sure if you've seen that number, and do you think, does that mean
No,
the
I
strategy
haven't
isn't
seen.
working? Yeah, so that came out, I think, by Reuters. There's a report. I'll let you can verify it, and I'll have the team check it quickly now. Send me the link. If the producer can send me the link, I can read it out to you. But there's been a report that the strikes by Ukraine, I'll read out from the report, have only impacted Russian oil production by 3%, which would be pretty
It's
significant.
maybe oil production, but fuel production is impacted more, I think.
I'll get the number for
Because
you. I'll get the article. I'll get the article for you to make sure we get the facts. But the ATACMS missile strike into Russia, how significant do you think that is?
no, it's just not so significant. This missile has a limited range. It was, I think, launched on Baltimore airfield in Voronezh. And from what I saw, Russians definitely shot down at least one missile. There were the shrapnel on the body of this ATACMS. So it's hard to tell whether the strike was definitely successful or not. About refineries, well, judging on all of those videos coming and the fact that Russian refineries stopped in many of the cities, multiple of the regions, and the fact that Russians, like not in entire Russia, but they struggle with fuel supplies, I don't think it's just 3%. I heard the news maybe 1 month ago that it was up to 23 if we speak about fuel production. But yeah, if you have most recent numbers,
I'll get you. Yeah, I've asked the producer to send me the link now for the report, and I'll read it out from there. While waiting for that report, just want to go back to the peace plan. There's one report by the Telegraph that says that Kiev would maintain legal ownership, so Ukraine will maintain legal ownership of Donetsk and Lugansk. Not sure what that means, legal ownership, and Russia would pay some sort of rental fee for that region, for de facto control of the region. Have you seen that by the Telegraph? Do you know what that would mean? It just seems very vague and confusing.
It's also very confusing for me. De facto Ukrainian ownership is in Crimea as well. Like from the law perspective, Ukraine owns those territories, but sorry, not de facto, but de facto Russia controls those. But according to international law, Ukrainian law, it's recognized by Ukrainian territories. Maybe something they like. I think it doesn't really matter. And all of this peace deal is basically what Putin said just recently. I shared it also on my media, that we will complete. All the same time, for Russia, it's quite suits the current dynamic of the special military operation, which is leading to achievement of our goals of the special military operation. So they are pretty much satisfied with what is happening on the ground, and I don't think that for them it will force them to stop this war. That's what Putin said yesterday, that also in his meeting he was wearing military uniform. He met with his generals, and he said that it's not the Ukrainian government ruling Ukraine. Those are corrupt gangsters, syndicate. They took the power since March 2024. They're illegal, and we're gonna fulfill the goals of the special military operation. That's what Putin said. And according to Trump's logic, or Witkov's logic, I don't know, Ukraine should negotiate with Putin on this deal. But for Putin, Ukrainian government are the gangsters. So I don't think that negotiations are really possible with that attitude.
And there's also talks about security guarantees for Ukraine. 10-year plan for security guarantees. How would those security guarantees look like if there's no boots on the ground? There's no NATO membership, which you don't believe is that much of a guarantee anyway. What would those guarantees look like? I think I read somewhere about the U.S. military presence in Poland that would be used to offer security for Ukraine. What can the U.S., what can NATO do to offer Ukraine security?
Well, Mario, it's hard to say at this stage what they mean by security guarantees. We don't have lots of the information deep into those proposals, what was discussed between Witkov and Dmitriev. I think Zelensky, Ukrainian government will now negotiate with J.D. Vance. Today there was a call also with Donald Trump the next week directly. it's hard to say what could be. For me, security guarantees is the strong Ukrainian army. That's the only security guarantee. Yeah, I
So
don't see like
any peace plan with demilitarization should be a no-go for Ukraine because it doesn't
yeah
offer Ukraine
no
deterrence for future Russian attacks.
yeah of course. There is no
Okay, going to the
demilitarization demand for Russia, so for Ukraine it should not be a demand as well. So
going back to the previous point we were talking about, so I'll read out here from the Kyiv Post, and I'll have the producer KK, if you can send it through to Denis as well, so he has the link. Ukraine strikes takes, that's on Kyiv Post, and I think Reuters came up with the story. Ukraine strikes take 20% of Russia's oil refining offline, which is the number you've mentioned, but output falls only 3 to 6%. Ukrainian drones and missiles disabled 20% of Russia's refinery capacity in recent attacks, but Moscow limited losses to a 6% drop by activating idle units at other plants. I was going to put the article there on the screen. Considering the output only fell 3 to 6%, would that mean? So the reason is that Moscow activated idle units at other plants, so they had more capacity there that was sitting idle that they activated when refineries were hit by Ukraine. Does that mean that the strategy of hitting oil refineries may not be working as Ukraine would have hoped? And does that mean that the main pressure being placed on Moscow now is not militarily by Ukraine, at least not with the refinery attacks, because that was the main focus, but more by the sanctions that are placed by the US and allies?
yeah, probably yes. If those numbers are real, yeah, probably sanctions are playing bigger role than the strikes on Russian refineries. Still, it matters, yeah. Especially, I think the strikes on the Russian export port in Novorossiysk, but somehow it resumes not full but operation after Ukrainian strike. Yeah, the Russians are still capable to restore, you see, refinery capacities. Also, they work with other countries, like, for example, Belarus. Maybe they'll sign up agreements with Kazakhstan, their partners as well, for the military bloc, to receive refined fuel coming from those countries as well. We'll know that Belarus, it has a big refinery. It supplies fuel to Russia. Before the war, actually, Belarus supplied fuel to Ukraine, and it covered lots of the Ukrainian needs. Almost on every Ukrainian gas station, there was the fuel from Belarus. That is how powerful refinery is in Belarus. So potentially, yeah, Russia may compensate, as we see. Maybe those strikes, they don't play that much role. But Ukraine intensified the strikes since August, I think. Before it was an agreement not to touch Russian infrastructure. So August, now it's close to, so for a few months, Russia lost at least 3%. It's also like some sort of the achievement since Ukraine just started to use that kind of the weapons. And also Ukraine is changing for Neptune missiles. I'm not speaking about Flamingo. I have doubts about the effectiveness of that missile. It's not that effective. But Neptune is quite effective, so could be used also, because the main part of the Russian refineries were hit just by the drones that may carry just small payload. But sanctions, I agree, yeah, with you here that definitely they play the great role, maybe greater than hitting Russian oil infrastructure.
I want to go to the hybrid warfare that Russia's undertaking right now. If you believe Russia's behind the attacks in Poland and the ship near Ukrainian territory, near British territory. But let's talk about the sabotage attack in Poland on the railway that was supplying aid to Ukraine. Have you seen those news?
Yeah, I'm saying them.
That was a few days ago. How significant is Russia taking up the heat on NATO to try to pressure NATO to accept some sort of peace deal and reduce support for Ukraine? Because obviously, Zelensky cannot make a decision without the EU and the US being behind that decision, at least one of those two parties being behind that decision, if not both. Because not having US support is difficult, but European support is still there to compensate for it. Not having European support is extremely difficult, but the US could compensate for it, highly unlikely under Trump. Not having both their support, the war is, I wouldn't say over, but becomes very difficult for Ukraine. So if Russia's undertaking that is attacking Poland, is got all these drone incursions across NATO, scrambling and shutting down airports, and now we've seen what happened, that research ship in the UK that was firing lasers onto RAF pilots. What is Russia's strategy there? Is it part of putting pressure on NATO, and do you think it will have any impact on whether we see a peace deal?
Yeah,
on whether NATO will pressure Ukraine, say, look, we cannot keep this. It's going to impact our economy. It's going to impact public support is dropping. We need to end this war, and we got to accept something that we might have not accepted a few months ago.
Yeah, maybe it's also the pressure for Ukrainian financial support, military support. It's all combined. Well, at least, with those cases with Polish railroad and Russian ship, well, officials, they say it is Russia, so I believe this official information. I wasn't there, by the way, in Poland. Those were Ukrainians, so who lived in Belarus
with Russian intelligence.
Ukrainians working with Russian intelligence. Actually, there are lots of the people who work with Russian intelligence from Ukraine, from what I understood. And the same day, by the way, Poland opened the border with Belarus. There were several of the checkpoints which were closed. So the same day it happened, checkpoints were open, and those guys, they went back to Belarus. Quite interesting policy of Poland. Also quite interesting policy that European countries, they still do not shut down those drones which are flying. Also tells a lot about reaction. And Russia, if it is involved, I think it is, it just applies pressure not to confiscate, for example, Russian assets, not to cancel contracts with Russian oil companies, not to help Ukraine too much. And everything, this war is kind of strange overall, because European partners, for the last year, there was the graph, I don't remember where it is, with particular numbers, but they paid for Russian gas and Russian oil more, and for different Russian products, than for support of Ukraine. And this difference is huge. It's like 100 with something billion euros, according to. And they increased actually consuming of the Russian products and Russian fossil fuels for the last year. So yeah, it's the reality.
You're talking about which country? Poland?
No. I mean in general, European Union. European countries.
Oh, okay. Sorry, European Union. So they're increasing that. So despite this war, and despite supplying Ukraine with all these weapons and money, they actually increased purchases of imports,
Russian
various
gas,
imports,
Russian
gas imports throughout that period. European have increased those imports. So that was something that Trump has pressured Europe to start cutting those imports. But Europe doesn't have many alternatives. Europe's energy sector is just in shambles right now, so they really don't have a choice. They're in a pretty difficult position.
I see. So yeah, Europe is also it's in position that we should somehow to counteract the Russian provocations, let's call them like that, but at the same time trade with Russia. So this looks like it is happening. Yeah.
The world works in funny ways. The world works in very funny ways. Talking about the world working in funny ways, do you think that this is, and I asked the previous guest the same question, do you think this is Trump, this entire peace plan is just Trump trying to show that he's trying to reach some sort of peace agreement, but the end goal is to escalate again, as we've seen previously? Previously, we're talking about pressuring Zelensky to accept a peace plan. Pressuring Putin to accept a peace plan, meeting him in Alaska. And then right after, Trump posts about Ukraine gaining back their territory and potentially even more, and started discussing supplying Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. Now we've got a peace plan again on the table after discussions with Russia without Ukraine being on the negotiating table. Could we then see another round of escalations? Or do you think Trump is genuinely seeking peace right now and could actually reach it?
Yeah, I think Trump is generally seeking for peace in Ukraine. He just doesn't care how it could be reached. Whether Russia occupies some of the Ukrainian territories, whether Ukraine reduces its army, for him it's something that could be negotiated. For Ukraine, it's no-go, like it's red line. For Trump, it is okay. That's why he is pushing any sort of he's looking for a solution. Once he pressed Russia with sanctions, now he presses Ukraine, give up those territories. Like here is Dmitriev Vitkov plan for you that they just translated from Russian to English. In Google Translated is already evident. So for him,
so that's an interesting point. The peace plan has been reported that the peace plan was essentially translated. So some analysts looked at how it was worded, and it was just translated from Russian to English, which kind of shows that essentially this is a plan written by Russia, repurposed by the US, and presented to Ukraine?
Yeah, so for him, like the outcome is no war, but he doesn't care, like in a long-term perspective, what it could be. For his term, like how many years, 3 years left, he would like not to see those kind of the confrontation. But it's very hard to trust Russia because there were Minsk agreements before, Budapest memorandum. So Trump is genuinely looking for a solution, but he doesn't really care how. He says himself that the war that could have lasted for several days is lasting for 4 years. So he is disappointed. Like Russia could have occupied Ukraine in a matter of days. So this outcome will also be okay for Trump because he might trade with Russia. I don't know, have the access to the Russian rare earth minerals. And the general idea from United States politics, I think it is already there for decades, to make
access
Russia
to Ukrainian rare earth minerals.
Yeah, but Ukraine doesn't have lots of those. If you check out Ukrainian mineral map, it's basically not too
You mean
much.
having access, when you say having access to Russian rare earth minerals, is that part of a peace deal? Okay. As part of a peace deal, the US would be able to decouple from Chinese reliance on rare earth minerals and be able to seek some supply from other countries, Saudi, etc., and Russia. So that's part of a peace plan where, hey, let's end this war. Even if Ukraine doesn't keep all of his territory, I don't really care about Ukrainian territory. I care about the US, America first. And look, I want the rare earth from Russia. I want to do a deal with Putin. I want to open up trade with Russia. I want to do some sort of deal in the Middle East. So what's better for the US rather than what's better for Ukraine?
Yeah, of course. And also for him, I think for America in general, the dream is to make some sort of the confrontation between Russia and China, for them not to be allies. I think that's the final goal. Not, I mean, military confrontation, but after all, to have Russia as an ally. It's their goal, I think. And if it is for Ukraine to be given for Russia as a sacrifice, let it be. I think the policy is like this.
Denis, last question I have for you. Some news that's pretty hard to digest for any Ukrainian. That's the corruption scandal that just came out. About $100 million, includes people in Zelensky's inner circle. Can you tell us more about it and what's your gut reaction? Because Ukrainians are pretty pissed off. The polls show Zelensky's taking a hit, probably the least popular he's been since the war started. But we'd love to get your reaction.
Yeah, it's actually good that we have this NABU. By the way, it's funded by our Western partners, by Europeans and Americans, that they still were capable to start this investigation. I require like lots. I have to say a lot about this corruption scandal. It is very, very bad that people from President's circle were involved in it, and I think that NABU should publish all of the information available relative to energy sector, military, because by the time of the war, of course, having that level of the corruption is no go. And I think that even if Zelensky is involved personally, he should step down.
Do you think it could be involved?
I think for now there are no direct allegations towards Zelensky, but those people who were with him for decades. I mean, his personal trusted friends, and I don't believe that Zelensky didn't know about it. Like I personally, I do not believe that Zelensky didn't know, especially the fact that he tried to get rid of NABU sovereignty, let's say, or independence back in summer. Then Ukrainians went on a protest against that. NABU already started to dig under his friends, and that is how maybe he wanted to implement this law. He actually implemented it to cancel the sovereignty of NABU and the Special Anti-Corruption Prosecution Office. He made it to the law, then he received lots of the critics from Ukrainians, from European partners, and he canceled it, backtracked.
Wow. Okay, so he wanted a few months ago, he wanted to remove the sovereignty of this anti-corruption organization that was investigating people close to him and him. We could say it's investigating Zelensky, I'm sure. And now a few months later, it essentially found people that were friends with Zelensky for decades involved in Ukraine's biggest corruption scandal yet, in the middle of the war, in the energy sector, out of all sectors, at a time where Ukraine is facing mass blackouts.
Yeah. So it's the perfect storm for Ukraine. We have huge, like it's the biggest scandal since the start of Ukrainian independence, since 1991. It's the biggest scandal, corruption one. We have pressure now coming with this some sort of the peace plan to give up territories and to reduce maybe army. Also, Russia is attacking on the front lines more. They poured more reinforcements. They are definitely taking more ground. So it's the perfect storm. And how to get out? Ukraine should change. I mean, Ukrainian military command should be formatted. It should be reformed. Everything. Ukrainian government, the way how Zelensky governs everything and parliament. So everything should be restructured, because it's not about Donald Trump. Who causes lots of the problems to Ukraine. It's Ukrainian, sometimes even incompetence itself, in army, in Ukrainian management, Ukrainian government. Unfortunately, it's like that. And not just me saying it. Even if you read the big patriotic volunteers, like, for example, Sternenko, he's a nice guy. He writes about it. He says that we should change or we die. And it's not about Donald Trump. It's about Ukraine itself, the way how army men are used on the front lines, why they are trapped, for example, almost trapped, in Mirnograd for so many days, why they didn't take them out before. So there are lots of the questions to military command, to Ukraine as the government. But with this recent peace plan and really pressure on Ukraine, what the United States did and what Trump did, they again force Ukrainians to consolidate around Ukrainian government, because like today Zelensky went out to the people and said, we're not going to agree on this. And of course, people support that we're not going to agree on this, like just capitulation of the territories voluntarily. So now he has more plus. I mean, Zelensky. Huh?
That's a bad spot to be in for any Ukrainian citizen.
Yeah.
It's a difficult time. Are the people around Zelensky being arrested after this investigation, the corruption scandal?
They were like Chernyshov, who is also a friend of Zelensky and whose wife is a friend of wife of Zelensky, and they have some sort of those connections. He was arrested and even was put behind the bars, but someone paid for him 50 with something million hryvnias as a bailout, so he's a free man. The same story happened to other officials. And Mindich, who is, as I say to you, a childhood friend of Zelensky, like then I say decades, they know each other, I mean decades. He left the country, and I don't know where he is, maybe in Tel Aviv. Like rumors say he's in Tel Aviv because he has an Israeli passport. Sanctions were applied on him by Zelensky, but again, Zelensky mentioned him as a citizen of Israel, and Israel will never give its citizens to Ukraine. So it's like nonsense, yeah. Like that.
Jesus.
So, yeah.
Can Zelensky call for elections if he keeps facing pressure? Could he call for election in the midst of war, despite martial law?
No, he cannot. Like, it's physically not possible, I think. Or you should extend those elections for many weeks for people, all of the people to vote, including those who are at the battle frontline area. It's hard to achieve. Like, maybe this is achievable, maybe not. We'll see. But like, he always has the option to step down and resign and give all of the duties to, in this case, according to Ukrainian constitution, it will be the spokesman of the parliament. The spokesman of the parliament could take the president's duties. But again, it's a very unlikely scenario for Ukraine. I mean, very bad also to lose president in the middle of the conflict.
Wow.
I hope it will be not done like that. I hope Zelensky is not directly involved in corruption scandals himself, or his friend Yermak. I think Yermak, well, there are also many questions towards that friend of Zelensky, who is the head of the president's office. There was the scandal. They wanted to, like, even members of parliament from Zelensky's party, they wanted Yermak to step down, but Zelensky still keeps him. And there are lots of the rumors around Yermak character. I hope NABU will uncover everyone involved, and I just hope that Zelensky is not in this list. It's like, Americans have their Epstein scandal. We have our own scandal, which also
NABU scandal.
NABU scandal, yeah, which also touches high elite president's circle, and also could be president out there. We'll see. NABU should release everything. They have their own YouTube channel where they publish openly all of the audio information, all of the
That's a positive. That's a
everything
silver
possible.
lining that Ukraine's been fighting corruption for many years, or since the 90s. And to have an organization like NABU is at least a silver lining in all this, that hopefully after the war ends, we'll be able to root out that corruption to allow Ukraine to flourish like other Nordic nations and other.
Yeah, I hope so. And
neighbors.
like at least there is the difference in Ukraine. So even in wartime, there is no immunity, I guess, for president as well. If NABU uncovers everything, he will resign. That's it. So
that'll be a significant moment. Dennis, always a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much for making the time, and hope to speak to you
Mario.
again. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you
Thanks
so
for
much.
having me. Thank you.
Pleasure.